How drab, how dull critique can be. It's begging and pleading for apathy. The good, the bad, the in-between. And nothing is everyone's cup of tea. No time to waste, there's things to do. But Jared and Eric are happy too. They'll suffer the worst of films for you. So enter the strangest of banquet rooms.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Banquet at the Flum Dumpster. This is our first episode, so thank you so much for joining us. I feel like I'll just right off the bat want to address the first question that you probably have, because one of the words in our title is likely unfamiliar to you.
Mm-hmm.
So a dumpster is a receptacle that you would put garbage into.
Is it now?
Yeah, I just wanted to put that out there for anyone who was unfamiliar with that one word in our title, and I think we can keep going now.
So this is a podcast about movies.
Yes, so this is a podcast where we are going to watch the worst movies that we can find.
The worst possible movies that we can find.
And we're going to get these movies, we're going to discuss them, dissect them.
Yeah, we've got a bit more of a structure that we're working with than that.
Yeah.
The first half of each episode will be, spoiler-free, usually recorded before we watch the film, talking about any prior knowledge that we have walking in and what our expectations are.
And then the second half is the spoiler-filled, us reacting, crying, laughing, and we unpack the disaster we just witnessed. And maybe find something insightful to say about it.
Yeah, find some kind of galaxy brain take about the horrible movie that we just watched, if you want to say so.
Yeah, hopefully. But we should also clarify, that's going to be every episode except for this one that you're listening to right now.
Yeah, this one's a little special.
This one's a little different. This one, we haven't watched a movie. We're not talking about a movie. This is just us kind of laying out, who are we? What are we going to be talking about in this podcast? How is it different from other podcasts? And
how did we get here?
How do we get here? Some concepts that we're going to be using, throughout, terms. Mm-hmm. This is basically, our glossary, if you will.
And it also summarizes a lot of the, key theoretical frameworks that we're approaching this concept through. Which means that this is a bit more of a theory-heavy episode, which might not be everybody's thing, but will hopefully be really interesting if you are also a nerd like us. But also not necessary.
So if you want to, listen to this, we really encourage it because it'll give you, a great framework for, what we want to get out of this. And, it'll, I think, enliven every other episode. But, if you want to just go and listen to Super Mario Brothers, our analysis of that, that's the next episode.
It's up right now. Go do it.
We won't miss you.
And that one's a lot less boring. That one's a lot more of us watching a movie and making jokes about it and finding those galaxy break tanks.
And spoiler alert, we loved it.
Oh yeah. That movie was lots of fun and the episode's lots of fun and you should absolutely go listen to it.
Yeah.
I invite you to listen to this one first, but you don't have to. You don't have to listen to any of our episodes in order.
No.
And you can feel free to remember this one and come back to it later when you want to hear this sort of thing. You can feel free to never listen to this episode at all. You can feel free to not listen to any of our podcasts if you just don't like the sound of my voice.
Or mine.
Uh-huh.
But let's start with the first question that I raised, which was, who are we?
Good question.
I ask that myself every day.
I ask myself that question every day. My name is Jared. I am a first-year PhD student in cinema and media studies. My master's thesis was actually on bad cinema, specifically the uses or functions or meaning of the word bad when talking about cinema as both a category of aesthetics and a tool of reception. My main research interests right now are in badness and bad movies and also in serial television. I also enjoy other things like knitting and improv. And yeah, who are you?
My name is Eric Tisch, and I did my undergraduate degree in film and went into more of the business side of film. I worked for 2 years at a distribution company in Toronto, Canada, for those of you who don't know where that is. Called Entertainment One, and now I work as the programming manager at Real Canada, an organization that promotes Canadian film. Since you also listed your hobbies, I enjoy baking, cooking, and I watch and play a fair amount of sports.
And you also watch a lot of movies. Like, you watch even more movies than I do.
Yeah, I'd say that's an accurate statement. I definitely watch like at least 300 movies every year, plus like hundreds of shorts. Like that was just features. So I'd say, yeah, we can kind of say like I'm more of that like prototypical film buff, whereas you're more of like the film scholar because you view movies a little differently, I'd say.
Yeah, I would say that I'm definitely much less motivated by like an intrinsic love for cinema as a medium or a desire to develop the kind of encyclopedic knowledge of film history and trivia that you have. And I'm more motivated by just like a fascination, an interest in the medium, and a desire to kind of uncover the things that we can learn from cinema. Like, what can understanding this medium teach us about the world that we live in, and how is the world that we live in influenced by the popular culture that permeates it?
Yeah.
And I think that dynamic between the two of us has the potential to make for a really interesting series of discussions. Because it has up until this point, because we've been doing this without recording our conversations for about like 6 years now.
Yeah.
Like, how far back can we trace the story of how we got here?
I think it's important to like go back to back when we were in university. We worked on this undergraduate thesis together, and I think that was where our conversations really started to pick up about this, because we both had independently liked watching these movies, but we wanted to do like a study on like So Bad It's Good, like what made that happen.
Yeah.
And I think that was where we really started to like explore all of these questions about evaluation, like what made a movie bad, what made art bad, what are all these different terms that people use, and then like we started watching So Bad It's Good movies, but it expanded so much.
So much.
Like, it became a 80-plus page paper where, like, we undertook so much. It was really broad. Not a great paper, probably.
It was not a great paper. I revisited it a couple of years ago. It is not a great paper.
And we also made a movie. Like, it wasn't enough just to write the paper. We made this movie, Life Hacks the movie.
Life Hacks.
Which we worked on for like 3 days, and it was like almost a feature-length movie, and it was bad, which we were trying to make it bad. We wanted to see if we could make a bad movie, and we succeeded at that, at least.
Well, it's the type of thing where, like, because we were trying to make it bad, if we succeeded at making it bad, it would no longer be bad. So we just kind of... I think that was the conclusion that we came to, though, as well, is that we kind of...
My conclusion was, we made a bad movie.
I think it's definitely bad.
Yeah.
But there's also, like, something to be said about how, like, the word bad is kind of something that I want us to problematize with this podcast.
Yes. Oh, that's one of our shared goals.
Yeah.
In this whole podcast.
In my master's research into badness, I like in reading what other people have said about evaluation and like about cinema, I kind of came to the conclusion that the word bad is not actually a very useful descriptor for a film. Like, if I take a movie that just, like, The Fantastic Beasts 2, The Crimes of Grindelwald from 2018, and I call that a bad movie.
Oh, my God. Oh, God. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I would agree.
What does that actually tell me about the Crimes of Grindelwald? Or about, movies as a whole? Part of what makes the word bad so confusing is that it kind of broadly describes very different things that may or may not be mutually exclusive without allowing the opportunity to make that description more specific.
Yeah.
For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to narrow these down to two broad themes. That the word bad either describes a tool for reception or a category of aesthetics. This means that when I describe the Crimes of Grindelwald as bad, I am either using that word to A, express something about my own personal experience of the film. Maybe it is outside of my taste preferences. Maybe I found the experience of watching it to be in some way unfulfilling. But regardless, I'm using that word to communicate something about my own experience of watching the movie.
And I think that's how most people kind of look at it.
Yeah. Alternatively, I could be using this word to B, describe a tangible aesthetic property that I think the film holds. Maybe I don't think that the different moving parts of it just don't quite fit together.
Yeah.
Or maybe I think that it's attempting to be a certain thing and not succeeding on its own terms. Mm-hmm. But either way, I'm still using that word to practically describe the text of the film itself and identify a specific feature of it. The problem here is that these are all described by the same umbrella term, and its meanings are thrown around often interchangeably.
Yeah, it kind of just becomes meaningless. Yeah.
So sometimes we talk about a bad movie that we just subjectively disliked through terms that frame that dissatisfaction as if it is an objective feature of the text.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
Sometimes a circular logic kind of gets applied here. And the best way of understanding the badness of the Crimes of Grindelwald is just that it becomes a bad movie.
Perhaps rightfully so.
At the moment that it has had that property endowed onto it by a viewer.
Yeah, and I think in particular, I find the succeeding on its own terms as a really compelling way of describing evaluation when it comes to badness. Because if something, you can see what something's trying to achieve and it's failing, I think that's for me one that I try to use when I'm describing why I think something's bad. I mean, obviously I still have the subjective, this was bad. But I think I found myself moving away from that while we were doing our initial project, and I think that what I found really interesting is how mainstream conventions about talking about badness, they generally weren't acknowledged by academics, and I found you probably have noticed that a lot in your research and studies.
Yeah, and something that has kind of annoyed me a little bit about film studies as I get, deeper and deeper into it, is that this is something that the discipline recognizes, and it tries to get around it not by finding more specific words to understand how audiences talk about badness or evaluation, but by essentially just kind of making any form of evaluation a kind of taboo.
Yeah, there's the attitude that there's just so little for us to learn from the goodness or badness of a particular film that the category is just not worth talking about at all.
Exactly. And that's kind of something that I disagree with. I think that it's important in a first-year film class where you're trying to encourage your students to move away from the kind of social scripts or talking points.
Yeah.
That kind of makes up the basis of how we, talk about movies from day to day. But it's the type of thing where, useful or not, the word bad, or the category bad, is something that we as audiences practically use to make sense of the art that we consume. You know, this is an entire mode that cinema can operate within. One that arguably describes the majority of movies that get made or that have been made.
There are thousands of movies made every year, and there are so many that you don't even hear about. And it's not that there are like, oh, there are all these hits out there that they're hiding. The wealth that we can draw from for this podcast is basically unlimited. Like, we will never run out of movies.
We're basically talking about, you know, the majority of cinema in this podcast. Because, like, most stuff doesn't work in this particular way, or most stuff doesn't work for somebody.
Of course, we are scraping the bottom of the barrel.
We're trying,
not near the bottom of the barrel.
We're trying to get, you know, as close to the bottom as we can.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, because, like, it just means that we're going to watch a lot of bad movies.
Yeah.
Bad in quotes. Because it's like, in order to achieve our goal of, like, finding out what we can really glean from this word and why it's being used and all of this, we need to watch a lot of bad movies.
Yeah.
But you don't need to. You as an audience, I'm not talking to Jared here, you as an audience can just enjoy the fact that we are watching them.
Yeah.
Because that's what this podcast is for.
I firmly believe that if we want to understand cinema, you know, what it is, how it works, and how people are using it, we need to develop a comprehensive understanding of this category, bad. But not everybody needs to watch these horrible movies. And we are going to suffer through them. We are going to record our thoughts for future generations to hopefully learn something.
Yeah.
This podcast is either going to be interesting or it's going to be funny. And I hope that at any point in time it is at least one of those things.
Yes. And it could also be a chronicle of our collective breakdown.
Just descent into madness.
Yes. The descent into madness that is our life. But yeah, no, back to the...
Like how we've been talking about this thing for the past few years.
How we've been talking about it overall.
We've developed certain subcategories that we've used to talk about bad cinema over the past couple of years that like go into more detail than just the category of aesthetics and category of reception that we described earlier.
Yeah, so our word for the so bad it's good movie, we refer to as a nanar. And we love finding these.
Yes.
But it's when, like, the badness or, like, a text is just failing so extremely that it circles around and becomes great. Like, not great as, like, a movie, but just great to watch.
Like, pleasurable.
You just, like, it's a pleasure to watch because of how absurd its failure is, or there are just moments in it that you just think, oh my god, this film is a masterpiece.
And we started using this word nanar because we encountered it from the PBS Idea Channel episode on So Bad It's Good. And that was like kind of our first exposure to any single word used to refer to this concept. But again, like as I've been researching this, I have never actually encountered the word nanar for a second time. Everybody seems to have a different word for it.
Yeah.
So Bad It's Good is the one used by most, like, general audiences, but that's, like, clunky and awkward, and I don't like it. I've seen a couple of film scholars use terms like, just, like, straight-up trash or bad film that's, like, just one word, but that's a little bit too evaluative for my tastes, and I don't think that it quite describes the object that I want to be talking about.
Yeah.
Similar to Jeffrey Sconce's term paracinema, which I think is, which I find really useful in an academic context, but is a little bit too academic for a podcast like this. And the word paracinema is also referring less to the films itself and more to the viewing stance of kind of ironic evangelization of these horrible, horrible movies, more than it does to, like, it speaks to the specific finding of an actual text that lends itself to this viewing stance, because some texts lends themselves to a paracinematic reading better than others. There are movies that do work as nanar and others that just don't, and that kind of brings us to the like polar opposite concept that we have coined the phrase for ourselves. Eric, would you like to describe for our listeners what the opposite of a nanar is?
Yeah, because you may have seen in our title, The Banquet at the Flum Dumpster. Because a flum is what we use as a term for a just painful, unwatchable experience. It's just so thoroughly unpleasant that when you're watching it, you question every single decision you've made in your life up to this point that has brought you into watching this movie.
I think that's the best way of describing it. Like more as a process of experiencing that unpleasantness than by any formal property of the text itself.
Yeah, because like, and they tend to be more obscure movies. Like, they're usually the ones that like are in the dustbin of history, and we pull them out from somewhere.
Our job is to pull these films out from the deep, deep depths of the realm of the forgotten, because they have to exist there. Because if the general viewing public of people who, actually like movies were to discover these objects, the cognitive dissonance of having to acknowledge that this was a movie would make those people never to want to watch a single other movie ever again. And so it won't be impossible that a lot of the movies we talk about will be a little bit more on the obscure side.
Yeah, but like a more mainstream example could be movie 43.
Yes.
Which I've watched 3 times, thank you, Jared.
You're welcome.
But yeah, like even then, there could be someone out there who like genuinely loves movie 43. Yeah. And we don't want to say like, oh, it's a flum for them too, but it's
the type of movie that we personally, experientially, found to be so viscerally unpleasant every single time that it can only be understood as like a distortion on film itself. Like I think the origin when we came up with this term back in 2015, I think I was trying to talk to you about the movie The Sex Lives of the Potato Men.
Yeah.
And I think I misspoke the word film, which I do a lot because I can't do words. And we just kind of decided that Flum was a far more accurate descriptor for The Sex Lives of the Potato Men. And it just kind of stuck.
Yeah, so we at Banquet at the Flum Dumpster, we are combing through this vast selection of flums.
And nanars and all other flavors of forgettable or unpleasant or unwatchable content that exists in between. For the purposes of defining our terminology, like, if a nanar is so bad it's good, then a flum is just so bad it's bad. But for the purposes of this podcast, all manner of underwhelming media is up for grabs, because this is all part of our underlying mission.
Yeah, to try and find the very worst. What is the worst flum out there? What is going to break us? But we're still going through some other types of definitions. Like, there are other ones like, and this is, of course, not in any scholarly textbook out there at all.
I would like to go on record and say that I very much disagree with this one, but go ahead.
So I like to look at a movie that is so specifically in this like, I don't want to say quite mediocrity, but like, it is so completely in the middle of being nobody's going to say this is my favorite movie. Nobody's really going to say like, oh, I love this movie. And nobody's going to really hate this movie. And the term that I came up with back in 2015 was John Krasinski. Because John Krasinski, the actor from The Office at that time, he'd only done The Office, but I could just not imagine somebody looking at John Krasinski and saying, this is my favorite actor. Or, I hate John Krasinski. Nobody would say either of those things in 2015.
And I disagreed with that in 2015, and I disagree with it now. And it's so specific. You can't make such a wide claim about a single actor. You just can't. Also, a couple months ago, I 100% saw a very angry YouTube video specifically about John Krasinski.
Yeah, no, he has now become slightly more polarizing, and, you know, like, I still use that term because of the historical value between us, but I might need to pick somebody else.
I think you need to find somebody else.
Show, anyone from Lost. Maybe Evangeline Lilly or Terry O'Quinn. Like, nobody's gonna say they hate Terry O'Quinn.
Okay, but why does it have to be a person's name, Eric? Explain why it has to be a person's name.
It's just the way this definition works, people need to understand it. People need to find something so uncontroversial. That's all it is. But anyways,
agree to disagree.
We don't need to spend so long on my one specific definition that is in no way academic. So those are kind of the categories that we are going to be using. If you hear us using those terms, you will now know what we are talking about.
Yeah, we felt like it was important to solidify some of that early on.
We're going to try to be doing something a little different from other podcasts or TV shows or media that do these bad movie reactions. You know, we're not just looking at badness from a different way, which we are. Because, like, if you look at, like, Mystery Science Theater 3000 or How Did This Get Made, which are pretty prominent examples, they are really about, like, Mystery Science Theater is, like, commentary throughout a movie, making jokes. It's its own thing. There are, like, little segments that go out of the movie. Like, How Did This Get Made is just, like, we are going to trash this movie. That's not, like, all that we are interested in. We are looking at more, why is this on our list? Why is it bad? What has failed about it? And, like, we hope that you are interested in that.
Yeah. We're interested in, like, what we can learn from these movies and, like, trying to use them to understand badness as a category better. But also, like, trying to, in some places, problematize their status as bad. Like, a lot of the time, something that we try to look for, at least, is a kind of glimmer of value somewhere in there that I think is what makes our show, I don't know, interesting.
Yeah, I like to think so.
Yeah.
But, like, there's another question of, like, what do we get out of this? Like, you study this in academics. Why do this?
Yeah, well, I guess, like, a thing that this offers to me is a bit of an opportunity to, you know, explore or develop the ideas that I have about badness and bad movies in a bit more of an informal context. Like, I like that this podcast gives me the chance to experiment with half-formed ideas or half-formed connections without necessarily having to put in hours of research behind them or build them towards some kind of logical conclusion. Sometimes I can just build them towards a punchline.
Yeah, and if you will see, we don't do research.
But really, though, like, I do love academia, but it does have a tendency to be rather serious. Like, I want to be able to talk about how the secrets to the universe can be found in the 2015 Johnny Depp action comedy Mordecai without having to immediately back that claim up.
Yeah, and I also will obviously be getting something out of this because, like, in my daily life, both in my job and just in general, I tend to focus on promoting movies that are good. you know, by like trying to get people to watch like movies and saying like, no, trust me, like Canadian film is very valuable. I'm like constantly watching movies and saying like, this is like, I'm programming this for this audience because this audience is going to love this movie. So this is my opportunity to do the opposite of that.
I mean, sometimes we might come away from an episode and say, this is a movie worth watching.
Yes. That like, I don't think that will be exclusively what I'm doing here, but if I watch a movie for work and I don't like it, you know what I do with that? I don't tell anyone. But yeah, so that is our show. Like, that's that in a nutshell.
We're going to try and put out a new episode every, like, 2 weeks or so.
And we've got, like, a bunch that we've pre-recorded to, like, have a consistent release schedule.
So, because we're recording these episodes in advance, we might sound, like, completely oblivious to current events.
Yeah, like, when we recorded our episode on Geely, in the time between when we recorded that episode and when we're now going to release it, a celebrity couple... We
spent that episode on Geely making jokes about Bennifer, and at no point do we acknowledge that Bennifer got back together, because that didn't happen until after we finished the episode.
Yeah, so we basically manifested...
We manifested Bennifer.
Yeah, we manifested a celebrity couple, and we're not going to get credit for it because we didn't release it in time.
No, I'm so upset. And so, as this podcast evolves, we'd like to set up like a Patreon or something. If it looks like this thing is gaining traction, we'll have like some cool rewards in there to make it worthwhile for you all. You can also find us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @FlumDumpster, so you can go follow us there. You'll get updates on new podcast episodes and, I don't know, random musings from the two of us, maybe.
Yeah.
You can find me on Twitter @Jared Aronoff. And are you on Twitter, Eric?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter @Weather Network.
Is that your Twitter handle?
Yeah, I got the Weather Network actually before the Weather Network, but I only use it to post about the weather. So.
And you're sure that that's you and that's not the Weather Network?
You can message me directly there. I will respond.
Okay. Our lovely theme song was composed, performed, and produced by the one and only Tarquin Alexandra. You can find her on Twitter @TarkAlexandra, that's TARQ Alexandra, and you can stream her newest EP, A Tyrant's Demise, on Spotify, Apple, or any other music platform of your choice. And I think that's
it.
Our show.
I hope you vote.
Yeah. I hope you vote.
If the concept were to exist that I'm to explain, which it doesn't, in hypothetical terms, every form of art has a bucket, a container to categorize the format and style, the greats and the rotten. The podcast that you've just consumed did the work for you by scraping the bottom